welcome to Making Democracy Work, brought to you by the League of Women Voters. This is a series uh, about topics of community interest, and today we're going to talk about the Chronic Care Act, which is part of Medicare. And we have with us today Rafael Del Castillo, who is involved with medical things. And the Chronic Care Act was passed almost a year ago in September 2017 and became law in February of this year with the Budget Act. It seems to apply only to Medicare Advantage, except for one thing, which we will talk about later. And so maybe you can give us some idea of how it is now being implemented.
Well, for the moment, because the Act is relatively new, we don't have governing regulations, and the plans that are affected, the private plans that are affected, are just beginning to integrate the Chronic Care Act into their plan offerings.
Mm-hmm.
The first notice that I've seen was from Humana, and Humana is indicating that they're going to be integrating the Chronic Care Act into their plans. I haven't seen notices from any of the other many Medicare Advantage private plans, but the Chronic Care Act affects both Medicare Advantage plans and regular Medicare. And there actually are provisions that stretch across both types of plans. But Medicare, regular Medicare, or what we call regular Medicare, is of course the federally funded direct plan for seniors, which is administered by contractors that are engaged by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Studies. But it's a more direct program. Medicare Advantage is a separate program that delivers Medicare A and B plan services through private plans. And that dates back to the original conception in the Bush administration back in the early 2000s. Medicare Advantage plans were established, and the hope at that point in time was that privatizing Medicare would lead to higher quality care and savings in Medicare coverage.
Mm-hmm. Which leads us to talk about Medicare itself. All right. So I've had Medicare Advantage for many years. I didn't know that Medicare Advantage was only private plans. And so the Medicare pays the private plan for what it would ordinarily pay directly. Is that how it works?
Yes, it's like a premium that we pay for insurance on our home or our health insurance. Medicare pays private plans a premium for every senior that they have enrolled. Those premiums are driven in large part by reports that the Medicare Advantage plans make to Medicare concerning the health status and the what medically necessary care that seniors enrolled with the plan happen to require.
But Medicare actually reimburses the plan for the expenses that it incurs for its Medicare Advantage people?
That's essentially the way it works, yes.
Yeah, I see. And so a few years ago, although Medicare Advantage was conceived as a way to save money on Medicare, Medicare Advantage patients were actually costing more than regular Medicare patients.
That's correct.
Right. But since the Affordable Care Act has been enacted, there has been moves to make the spending on each patient on a par with regular Medicare. Mm-hmm.
That's true.
Mm-hmm. So that I have read that in 2017, the spending for each Medicare Advantage patient is the same as for regular Medicare. However, because the risk, let's see now, there's something about risk. Tell me about that.
Sure. Um, it just so happens that the population and about a third of the folks who are eligible for Medicare are enrolled with Medicare Advantage plans. So still 2/3 are enrolled in regular Medicare. And the population that happens to be enrolled in Medicare Advantage plans turns out to be somewhat healthier or less needy in terms of medical services.
Mm-hmm.
So they, under those circumstances, one would expect that those folks would actually cost less, and the Medicare plans would actually expend less for their care. But that's not the way it's been working out. The Affordable Care Act implemented a very broad collection of measures for not only for monitoring what is going on in health care, especially in Medicare, but also for coming up with profiles about how plans are performing, how Medicare is performing, and how individual providers are performing in terms of delivering quality care for a lower cost. So that aspect of the Affordable Care Act has been somewhat successful in closing the gap, because we've gone from Medicare Advantage plans costing on average 14% more than Medicare for the same enrollees to the two being on a par. And the only difference is that Medicare Advantage actually should be 4%, approximately 4% lower in cost than Medicare, regular Medicare, and it's not.
Mm-hmm.
The Office of Budget also reports that it figures that it spends about $14.5 billion a year as a result of what they call upcoding by Medicare Advantage plans, which essentially is profiling their patients to be need more medically necessary care than they actually do need.
I see. Mm-hmm.
So we had a case with United Healthcare coming under scrutiny and actually having a lawsuit filed against it for overcharging Medicare by $1 billion.
Wow.
That was last year. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, $1 billion compared to what is the gross of United Healthcare?
Well, United Healthcare 6 years ago had a market value of about $60 billion.
Mm-hmm.
United Healthcare has a lot of Medicare Advantage and Medicaid plans across the country, and it's gotten very deep into government plans.
Mm-hmm.
And today, United Healthcare's market value is approaching $300 billion.
Oh.
So about a 5-fold increase over 6 years in its
Mm-hmm.
market value.
Mm-hmm.
It's been quite profitable.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, when I first heard that the Chronic Care Act had been passed, I said, wonderful, because people with chronic conditions need to have more monitoring, more help, so that they will not only be healthier, but they will cost less, right? But does this really address the problem?
Well, as with most legislation that we get from Congress, there's goods and bads, okay? And I guess the most important thing I think that we can say is that seniors need to do what they can to understand what their health care coverage is about. And everybody needs to do what they can to understand what their health coverage actually means, or what is actually covered under their health plans. But for Medicare, because of the addition with Medicare Advantage, it became somewhat more complicated. That was limited by the fact that Congress, when it passed the Medicare Advantage program, required that Medicare Advantage plans provide the same coverage that Medicare provides. The Chronic Care Act has moved in another direction in terms of authorizing Medicare Advantage plans to do some benefit designing. What that means to seniors is you have to inspect the car before you buy it. I mean, you have to really look at what your coverage is going to be like. The good side of that is that the Chronic Care Act is intended to have plans be able to design for folks who have chronic illness and emphasize those benefits. Generally speaking, of course, the medical care for chronic care is more expensive often can be more expensive. And so one of the criticisms of the Chronic Care Act is that plans are going to be reluctant to do that. And instead they're going to try and flush the more expensive patients into regular Medicare. Regular Medicare doesn't have the same provisions in terms of being able to design benefits because it has federally mandated benefits. So it's a puzzle for seniors as far as that's concerned. And what I'm saying is that it's very important to look at what the plan actually covers. It's difficult for folks because you can't necessarily project what's going to happen to you in the future in terms of disease or chronic conditions, or you may not even have a chronic condition when you subscribe to your health care coverage. And so that's a difficult thing, but we do have annual enrollment, and a person can be in a Medicare Advantage plan and disenroll in the first couple of months of the year and go into regular Medicare if they're not satisfied. So the only thing that comes up is I have, for example, a case in which a senior in a Medicare Advantage plan was denied coverage, and because of the basis for the coverage denial, decided to disenroll from the Medicare Advantage plan and go into regular Medicare where the coverage was freely provided. And so that's a case that we're going to have to work out, but that can happen to folks. I mentioned that it's not exactly correct that Medicare Advantage plans provide the same coverage as Medicare, because there are different kinds of Medicare Advantage plans even now. And so there are HMO style plans, which have you have to go to certain providers, and you cannot necessarily readily go outside of your coverage area. So for example, if we had an HMO Medicare, if you were enrolled in an HMO Medicare Advantage plan in Hawaii, you would have to get pre-authorization to leave Hawaii to go see a provider on the mainland. May or may not be available. If you're in a preferred provider organization, you still would probably have to get prior authorization, whereas in regular Medicare, you don't have to do that. So there are rules that folks need to know. Medicare Advantage plans have historically provided some interesting incidental benefits, like silver sneakers. Some offer vision care, some offer things like dental care or supportive care that aren't covered under Medicare. And so Medicare Advantage plans have been authorized to offer additional supplemental benefits. And that's really what the Chronic Care Act has expanded, is that Medicare Advantage plans are now authorized to provide benefits that regular Medicare has not been authorized to provide. And those would include things like home modification, which isn't directly medically necessary, although I believe in many cases, for example, installing bars in a bathroom, for example, can be medically necessary if somebody's at risk of falling. But it's an argument as to whether that can be made medically necessary, and it's certainly not covered under Medicare, regular Medicare. So Medicare Advantage plans are authorized to provide those kinds of benefits or provide transportation, things like that. It has to be health related. In other words, it has to be expected to improve the health of the person.
Now, another thing about the Chronic Care Act is that it only addresses Medicare people.
So Medicare Advantage, you mean? Yeah.
Right. And so people under 65 also have chronic conditions, and it does not address that at all.
I see what you mean. Yes, definitely.
So Chronic Care Act is kind of a sweeping title, but it should say Chronic Care Act for people
for Medicare.
Over 65 or
Agreed.
for old people.
I agree.
Yes.
It does. The Chronic Care Act does address folks on regular Medicare as well as Medicare Advantage, but your point is exactly right. It only addresses Medicare eligible folks.
Right. Now, one of the things that it authorizes is telehealth, which I think is such a welcome thing, because people who are chronically sick don't want to have to go to the doctor if they catch a cold or something like that, and yet they actually do need to have some medical attention.
Yes.
So telehealth um, seems to be a good benefit of this.
Absolutely. And what the Chronic Care Act has done is it removes the requirements for being in a certain location to receive telehealth. That was what was in place previously. And so, as you say, that's an important benefit for folks who can't get necessarily to a doctor, or we believe that specialist care is going to be more readily available utilizing telehealth, because sometimes you can see a specialist using telehealth, and you may be able to see a specialist from your doctor's office or from some other location that isn't regulated or required by what Medicare used to require. So it's a good benefit.
Yeah, welcome to the 21st century.
Yes, it's about time.
Now, this is something that caught my eye: home dialysis through telehealth, so that people are taking dialysis at home
Yes.
can have help in actually performing the dialysis, right?
True.
Yes.
And what the Chronic Care Act has done actually is made some benefits permanent, where they were authorized for a while, but they had to be reauthorized by Congress. So home dialysis is one of those. Another one is speech generating devices for folks who suffered a stroke or brain trauma. That's now a permanent benefit. And one that I see frequently is the coverage for therapies such as speech therapy, occupational therapy, or physical therapy. Folks are routinely told that there are annual caps on the number of visits you can have for physical therapy, for example. That's not correct, actually, and it hasn't been since 2011, but it was so ingrained in the culture that a lot of folks are still told that. Congress finally acted after a federal court said there are no limits, everybody. There are no annual limits, and so Congress acted in the Chronic Care Act to make no caps a permanent part of Medicare and Medicare Advantage. So that's a definite improvement, because sometimes 8 visits isn't enough to really rehabilitate somebody if they've had a severe injury or stroke or whatever. So those are good changes.
Now, you say you've encountered these things.
Yes.
Tell me how you encounter them. Tell me about your practice.
Okay. Well, I practice law, and my specialty has been representing patients, members of health plans, Medicare, Medicaid, and private health plans, who have been denied coverage for anything ranging from chemotherapy to bone marrow transplants to splints to surgery like spinal fusion surgery, various kinds of things. For one reason or another, their insurance or Medicare or Medicaid may deny coverage, and an argument has to be made that the services are actually medically necessary for this person and meet the criteria for medical necessity to improve their life, save them from dying in some cases, and or save them from serious injury. So that's what I've been doing for the last 20 years.
I see. So that's why you're intimately familiar with the actual law.
Well, it's a lifetime process becoming familiar with the law. It's quite complicated. But yes, I'm working on it.
I see. Now, the percentage of Medicare patients who are in the Advantage plans has been rising, and it's on the rise. I saw a statistic where I'm not sure how many years, 10 or 15 years, it will be up to 42%.
That one I haven't seen, but 2027 is supposed to be the 2/3 marker. So 2/3 of Medicare eligible folks are supposed to be enrolled with Medicare Advantage plans by 2027.
Wow.
So it hasn't proceeded as quickly as was expected, and because of the cost issues, maybe fortunately so.
I see. Okay, so let's say we have some in our audience who are in regular Medicare.
Yes.
how should they decide that they want to be in Medicare Advantage?
Well, they should, of course, evaluate the coverage provisions of any Medicare Advantage plan that they're considering. I have some other suggestions about that too. It's sort of difficult to compare a Medicare Advantage plan's offering with regular Medicare, but we have some resources that are rather helpful in that regard. There is an organization called the Medicare Advocacy Center, and there's one called the Medicare Rights Center. There's also one called Justice in Aging, and those organizations are national organizations that publish quite a bit about what's going on in Medicare, what new laws are coming on board or have come on board. They routinely write Congress their position on those sorts of things, and sometimes reading those publications can really make a difference between what a senior knows about or Medicare beneficiary knows about what they should be looking for in their coverage. Or
All right. So repeat those names
Sure.
slowly.
Okay. There's the Medicare Rights Center.
Medicare Rights Center.
Yes.
Yes.
There's Justice in Aging
Justice in Aging.
and MedicareAdvocacy.org.
MedicareAdvocacy.org.
That's
I
it.
see. All right. So you can Google those things, and then they will direct you to how to choose. What is the cost difference
Of those,
of Medicare Advantage and Medicare? For Medicare, you don't have to pay, but you do have to pay something to go into a Medicare Advantage plan.
well, it depends on the plan design, but for folks who've been working for more than 10 years, Part A Medicare, under regular Medicare, is no cost. There are copays for hospitalization because that's Part A is the hospitalization part of Medicare. And there are copays for hospital stays. There are also copays per day for stays in skilled nursing. Part B of Medicare, which was originally part of the original act, is for doctor care, diagnosis, lab tests, and so on and so forth. But outpatient care is basically the whole category. And there's actually a premium for Part B, which is if you receive Social Security, it's deducted from your Social Security unless you pay it out of pocket. Then, in addition to the premium, there are some minimal copays for certain things under Part B. Part C, Medicare Advantage, some plans are no cost, no premium. Some plans, but they may have copays at doctor's offices, and that's where you need to read the plan document to find out what you're going to pay for a doctor's visit or what you're going to pay for a hospital visit if you're going to pay. And any other supplemental benefits that you might have under the plan will also should be disclosed in the plan document, and that can be compared because the regular Medicare co-payments are specifically delineated in the law. Very easy to find out on Medicare.gov. So you can make those cost comparisons.
I see.
And it is definitely plan driven. I don't know that there are any Medicare Advantage plans that match each other exactly for their costs.
Yeah. So Medicare.gov does have something where you can compare plans. I know what is covered under each plan, and there's a way that you can choose a plan, and then it'll make a table for you.
True.
So that is one resource. I myself am so ignorant because I've always had Kaiser, and so when I turned 65 a long time ago, they said, well, if you pay for Medicare what is it? If you pay for Medicare B, then you can get Advantage. So I said, oh, that sounds good, and that's all I knew about it.
Sure. You're
Because
in a
I
very
knew I
large
was
group.
going to, yeah, I knew I was going to stick with Kaiser, and
Sure.
so yeah, the B because I wondered whether I even needed B since I had Kaiser, you see. So that's how they convinced me
Sure.
I needed B.
And it's oftentimes premium driven. Folks think about what the monthly premium is going to be like. There are Medicare supplemental plans that pick up all copays, for example, and most of them are pretty cheap. So if somebody's concerned about regular Medicare having copays or deductibles, because the annual deductibles is another measure of what the plan's costs are, then they can purchase supplemental Medicare coverage. I did want to mention something about the Medicare.gov site because there's a controversy going on right now with two representatives in the House of Representatives, Frank Pallone and Richard Neal, who are on the Ways and Means, wrote a letter to the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services asking a number of questions about a new handbook that Medicare has published and was circulating for comment to guide seniors to choosing plans. And it's my theory, and my position is shared by a lot of folks.
We have less than a minute, so
Okay.
Quickly.
There's been an effort by CMS to drive folks into Medicare Advantage plans. And so those representatives are questioning the new handbook for seniors because it seems like it is not providing accurate information about the differences between Medicare and Medicare Advantage.
I see.
And so that's something that the seniors also want to watch out for.
Well, that seems strange since Medicare Advantage actually costs more, that they would want to drive people into it. But we are out of time, and so
For another day.
I want to thank you so much for
Absolutely.
coming. Rafael Del Castillo, attorney, and what is the name of your organization?
The Hawaii Coalition for Health.
Thank you very much. I'm Pearl Johnson with the League of Women Voters. Thank you for watching.